Good. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a subgroup meeting of the Vermont Clean Heat Standard TAG, Technical Advisory Group. This is an opportunity for us to deep dive on the various complicated issues related to accounting for wood fuels in the Vermont Clean Heat Standard. There are a couple more people I was hoping would join. Catherine, did you get an RSVP from Adam Sherman or anyone from Efficiency Vermont? Because I'm really hoping he can be at this meeting.
I didn't hear back from Adam. Let me see who else might have responded. Molly from ANR should be joining, and Catherine from ANR. No.
Brian Woods.
Brian, nope, he was not available.
Oh. I'm just sending Adam a quick note.
He was invited, but didn't hear back.
And then Nora, I don't see Lisa either. Can you make sure she has the info?
Yeah,
Um, all right. So I have offered to facilitate. Does anyone else feel a burning desire to facilitate this meeting, or are folks okay with me doing that? Okay. I took a stab at writing up kind of a proposed flow. I'm a little concerned that we don't have, oh, good. Hang on. We've just got the people we need all at once. I'll give it another minute then. And in the meantime, let me see if I can share my screen, which it looks like I can. All right. Can you see my screen? Here.
yes.
We just got a couple of the folks I was waiting for. So it looks like I saw Adam, Lisa, and Catherine from Vermont ANR Forest Products joined. Before we dive in, what you missed is that I had offered to facilitate and nobody seemed to object. So I'm going to proceed in that vein. Before I go any further, does anyone represent, like any of the TAG representatives or people associated with TAG members that are participating on behalf of TAG members, does anyone have any schedule constraints, like you're only available for the first hour or something like that?
I may have to leave earlier, but that's that's the way it goes.
Okay. But Catherine, you're available the whole time?
I am.
Okay, great. Are you expecting anyone else from ANR to join this meeting? Oh, I see Molly Willard just joined as well. So I think that's probably critical mass in that case. Okay, great. Thank you everybody for making it. I took a stab at writing up sort of a proposed agenda for this meeting, and I wanted to just take a minute to see if this sort of makes sense for folks. It seems to me that we have two separate issues that are fairly distinct that we need to discuss. One is the definition of advanced wood heating installed measures, and one is issues around carbon intensity and life cycle accounting for woody biofuels. I am proposing that we spend the first hour or so on the advanced wood heating issue, And then the second hour on the carbon intensity life cycle accounting issues. So and then I for each of these, I sort of proposed a method to walk through them. I thought it would be, for advanced wood heating, there's a little bit of a status update. I'm gonna adopt a facilitator hat today and have Lisa and Nora represent NESCOM's perspective on this, and we can talk more about this, but we have a bit of a straw proposal that my NESCOM colleagues would like to share. Then we could move into some subgroup discussion, questions. I do think we need to allow time for public comment. I know these topics have been of high interest to members of the public who, some of whom are joining today. So I was thinking that we would pause after the initial discussion and take public comment, and then really try to move to how we're gonna kind of frame up these options for the tag consideration and vote at the next meeting on, sorry, I just gotta check my dates here. So what we're leading up to is that we have this subgroup meeting, and then there's a full tag meeting on November 14th. We are already behind schedule in kind of sharing the tag's perspective on these topics. So my hope is that we can leave this meeting with a game plan for how we're gonna be ready to have the tag discuss and vote on an option or a set of options at that next meeting for both of these topics. So what that might look like is that we determine which option or set of options we want to put forward, revise them further, get volunteers to write them up. We have been sending things really last minute, so I would like to aim for sending things around by the end of the week so that the tag can review them with at least a few days in advance of that next meeting on the 14th. So that was kind of what I was thinking. And then for carbon intensity, I think there's a little bit of just like aligning on basic understanding, at least that I need as someone who wasn't steeped in these issues. I've tried to do some of that. ANR has put together some thoughts and responses to opinion dynamics approach, again, subgroup discussion, public comment, and then really trying to frame up some options and steps forward. So that's my proposal for how we move through this and the timing, approximate timing of that. Does anyone have any feedback on this flow? And are there any other issues related to wood that are not on this list that anyone thought we were going to be discussing? What isn't on this list is all the public health issues. And I know Jared's here from Vermont Department of Public Health, and we've been working on writing up all the public health impacts, and there are serious public health considerations related to wood fuels. But I think that discussion will happen elsewhere, because I think we're going to need all the time to discuss these two main topics.
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, I'm going to move on if I'm not hearing any objections. So can I get like a thumbs up if anyone feels like does this feel like it's sort of helpful and kind of covers the bases?
It's fine. Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing a screen now, and let me stop screen sharing. And I'm gonna screen share a little bit later. I did just one slide on the carbon intensity stuff just to kind of get us organized. But on the advanced wood heating, I wanted to kind of share a little bit of a status update, or kind of where the where are we in the process? So we had 3 options that Ken Jones and others wrote up and that were discussed on the October 17th TAG meeting. There seemed to be some potential alignment in the TAG at that point. And so Ken and I and others attempted, started a process of trying to revise those and bring them back to the TAG. At that point, I came to realize that, I'm relatively new to NESCOM, which for those of you who don't know, represents air quality agencies. And has been working on wood heating issues for many years, and I came to realize that there was a lot of complexity and sort of devils in the detail issues around the definitions of advanced wood heating that we're going to take some time to resolve. Hence, we wanted to create the subgroup to create some space for those that were equipped to kind of go a little deeper to be able to do that. So that's why we weren't able to bring this back at the last TAG meeting, and we needed a little bit more time. And I also came to realize that my organization, NESCOM, has taken public positions on some of these questions that are pretty strong and clear. And so for the purposes of this discussion, I just wanted to state sort of for the record, I'm going to wear a facilitator hat and I'm going to defer to my colleagues, Lisa Rector and Nora and Nora Travis to represent NESCOM's perspective in this conversation, just because I think I can help sort of facilitate the discussion, but they're going to be the ones representing NESCOM's perspective because there's a lot of like history and inputs to that, a lot of expertise and knowledge. So what we have done, what Lisa and Nora have done is sort of written up a straw proposal. They took as a starting point the last version of the TAG proposal, but then they sort of had to go back to the drawing board on some aspects of that because of all this long history that NESCOM has. So what we wanted to share with you all today is kind of a NESCOM straw proposal. And what we thought is that we could walk through it and see what people think, what questions you have, and if there is any alignment around this proposal. And if there is not, then someone else or could take up kind of take on the task of writing up another option or set of options for the TAG to consider. I think this could be one of the options that the TAG considers. It's going to be the one that I, as a TAG member representing NESCOM, will end up voting for. But people, I want to recognize that other TAG members may have other perspectives on this issue that they would want to bring forward. So, but with that, does that make sense? I think I just wanted to kind of give that background, and I'd like to turn it over to Lisa to walk folks through the straw proposal and maybe sort of share some of just kind of how we came to this place where the devil's in the details on a lot of this stuff.
Emily, do you want me just to share my screen and start, or are we waiting?
Yeah, you should. I asked everybody to be able to share screen, so you should be able to share your screen. Yeah, and so at this point, this is NESCOM's straw proposal, and we offer it to spark discussion and reactions and see where we have alignment and where we don't.
And I want to, first off, I want to thank everyone for letting us join. And as Emily said, we pulled together some information. There were some current concerns at NESCOM when we saw the October 17th draft. And I know everyone's working really hard on this, but we decided to take a step back and take a look at some other programs. So I want to say also I'm working remotely in California. I do live in Vermont, but I am working remotely in California and don't have a camera. So I'm sorry you can't see me. But I just wanted to walk through. We did some research because there were some questions about what is the Efficiency Vermont program doing. In doing that, I also put together information from other Northeast programs. And so I just wanted to put it out there as background that Vermont is the only state that is providing incentives for cordwood stoves, or actually stoves at all. There's been there's been a change in direction for the role in subsidizing wood heating and incentivizing it. There are, as Emily pointed out, public health issues, but there are also significant air quality issues. The National Ambient Air Quality Standards for particulate matter have just gone down. We do have several areas of the country already in serious non-attainment due solely to wood heating. And we anticipate about 10 more areas of the country coming into non-attainment primarily due to residential wood heating. So it's of great concern to the air agencies, not just now, but to the future, to ensure that we don't go into non-attainment for these standards because they have very serious economic consequences for the areas that come into non-attainment. Fairbanks, Alaska, right now is anticipating that the cost to Fairbanks will be $50 to $100 million annually. It's a pretty severe economic penalty when you go into that area. Portola, California is about to go into that territory. So there are ramifications for increasing wood heating if you don't keep an eye on your particulate matter standards. And those standards go down. We just had a new annual standard proposed, and we anticipate there will be a new daily standard coming out in the near term. So that's just some background on why this is this for us. This is a very challenging area to work in. So as we look at this, you'll see that really the only place where we see cordwood appliances incentivized is in Maine for boilers.
Lisa,
And
if
in,
you're sharing your screen, we're not seeing that. I think you might.
oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, I'm a Teams person, so can you see it now?
We can. You might want to just make it a notch bigger.
Okay, let me. And as I do that, I just muted myself, so give me a minute. Thank you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
This is the challenge of finding something where you can see enough. And you're
Yeah,
not gonna, is that
that's
better?
better. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So this is just a chart that we pulled together for Northeast programs for wood heating incentives. This is actually a very different looking chart from several years ago, where we had states like Massachusetts and New York and other programs providing pretty serious incentives for wood heating. That landscape has changed. And I don't know if we want to go through this, but we pulled out here specifically information for stoves and central heating from Efficiency Vermont because the tag draft referenced aligning with that. So very quickly for stoves, it is a 2.0 grams per hour emission standard, and units that have efficiency greater than 75% using the measured higher heating value, and that does only allow the use of EPA certification data. It does not allow combining with other discounts, and it does not allow self-installation of appliances. And I will say installation matters. It's actually in terms of getting the expected performance. There have been studies that have shown that self-installed appliances have much higher emissions than professionally installed appliances. For the central heating, they only incentivize wood pellet boilers. They have a list. They also require installation. The systems must be classified as indoor units. They must have at least 1 ton of fuel storage, and commercial new construction projects are not eligible. So that is my understanding of the current Efficiency Vermont program. The other two programs that are still in place for central heating is the main boiler program that has a 70% efficiency requirement, qualified installer requirements. It also requires that the unit can run for 2 weeks without human intervention and has a minimum of 1 ton of pellet storage. In New Hampshire, they have an 80% efficiency requirement, use of qualified installers, and minimum of 3 tons of pellet storage. If we want to take a look at retired programs, there were also programs in Massachusetts and New York, and They are different programs. The Massachusetts program actually relied on the NYSERDA process to identify qualified technologies. The NYSERDA process had a review panel that reviewed test reports that to ensure that the testing was done appropriately. And they also had PMCO and efficiency requirements. So Massachusetts and NYSERDA, New York used the same approach for identifying technologies, but along with those performance specifications, they also had installation requirements that required the use of external thermal storage, bulk storage, energy audits, manual J sizing. They put limits on the amount of coverage financial incentives you could add, and some of them put adders in for eliminating old units. So that's a very quick background on kind of the lay of the land. Feel free to interrupt at any point if
Yeah,
you
why
have
don't
any
we pause there
questions.
to see if anyone has any questions, or especially if anyone, like if Adam or anyone from Efficiency Vermont wants to clarify or add anything. Okay, not seeing anything.
All right, so I'll move on to the next. So now, so that's just the background. We used that information to come up with a revised proposed option where we tried to incorporate what we heard from the tag, which is a sense that they don't want to limit things, but we have to recognize, or they understood that the lay of the land is a little complicated right now for wood heating. And so one of the key pieces that I keep being asked by my board on this question is, what does advanced wood heating really mean? And in looking at the previous write-up, I had a hard time answering that question. So I tried to make this first paragraph a little bit clearer in that uh, it is appliances that have verifiable high efficiency and low emissions. So trying to get at that top performing, you want it to minimize public health impacts and airshed impacts, and you want to make sure it's using the fuel efficiently. The next sentence goes on to say that all types of wood heating appliances are allowed, but they are used inside the homes. And this next, what's in the parens is important, defined by safety testing for indoor installation. As a 25-year veteran of working in this sector, and working on Vermont's outdoor wood boiler regulation. There were a lot of outdoor units that circumvented the rule by building sheds and saying they're indoor units, or they put them in a garage. And so if the intent is really to get at indoor installation only, they should be certified by safety testing. Typically it's UL testing, and there is a different test for indoor units versus outdoor units. So once again, making it verifiable that it's an indoor unit. I then tried to think about the questions that were being asked of me to what are the features. So the terminology is here is features, it's not requirements, but typically advanced wood heating, when we talk about it, has automatic fuel feeding systems. They are not manually fed appliances. So a pellet stove counts, you load a bag of pellets, it is automatically fed into the firebox. So automatic fuel feeding systems where you can control the flow of the fuel. And FYI, in Europe, there are units that do something like this, those automatic fuel cordwood units. We don't have those here in the US. We hope they come soon. And I've talked to some manufacturers who'd like to bring something like this in, but I am unaware of any cordwood stove or cordwood central heating system that has automatic fuel feeding. Combustion controls that modulate the air to fuel ratios for optimum burn conditions. One of the things that we know is any wood heating appliance can be made to operate badly, no matter how good that technology is, if it's operated incorrectly. So elements that modulate air to fuel ratios or do something to optimize and override for homeowner operations is another feature of an advanced wood heating technology. And then the other thing we add is other controls that optimize and ensure performance when installed. So that could be things like catalyst controls. We then added, in the case of central heating units, advanced wood heating appliances also utilize external thermal storage to minimize the impacts of cyclic heating. What we know about central heating is it's typically a bang on, bang off operation, and that really challenges a solid fuel. So the external thermal storage is actually you burn the wood in a batch at optimum combustion conditions, and you store that heat in external thermal storage, which can then circulate it for use. So in this first paragraph, we tried to define what would an advanced heating system look like. In the second paragraph, we were trying to communicate the reason why cordwood is not in here. So this actually pulls some language that was in the document further down. Just trying to communicate that right now, while there are test methods in there and there is data, there are significant questions about the representativeness and the appropriateness of those numbers. And I should say this isn't a nest composition. We even have the Industry Trade Association on record saying that current certification testing can't tell you what's going to work well in the field in a good, better, best fashion. What it can tell you is it a gross emitter or is it cleaner than something really bad? And that's the extent that we can tell from the current certification tests. But we did put in there, EPA is in the process of adopting new test methods that will improve the situation. We're several years away from that. But that's why we put in the sentence, when there's new data, this could be reassessed. So this was our attempt to try and create some language that perhaps is clearer and supports what we heard at the TAG meeting. We're putting this up here as a straw proposal, so I guess I'll stop now and see if there are any thoughts or comments or questions.
Rick?
Yeah, hi. This is more detailed than what we had previously. Can you explain to me how this substantively differs from what we had previously? And I don't remember if it was option 2 or option 3. The essential language, as I recall, the previous option, or the options that you're trying to synthesize, really what they said was we want to have minimum standards for efficiency and other emissions, and cordwood would not be eligible unless and until there were testing methods that were reliable, and then of course it's only eligible if it meets the standards. How is this language here seems to say all that, and I thought that's what the previous language said. So can you point out to me exactly where the differences are? What substantively is different about this?
So what I can tell you in my experience of this is word choice is critical in this sector. And so when in reading what was originally written, I could see how much of that language could be interpreted to get almost any technology through. And so if you want me to go through a point by point review of the old language, I could do that. I don't have that queued up to go, but if you'd like me to do that, I can. Emily, is that something you want me to do?
I don't know that that's necessary. I just, what this, I would agree with Rick that in terms of intent, this is totally consistent with option 3. And then at the last tag meeting, people were like, well, isn't that also kind of what option 2 says? Because it still requires people to meet standards. So we were trying to sort of remove the confusion between like option 2 and 3. But so I think substantively it's trying to accomplish the same thing, but because there's this risk of abuse, the specific word choice and reference to specific testing methods and things like certified for indoor use become very important. So the added language is adding those clarifications. So there's, certified for inside use inside homes defined by safety testing for indoor installation. The features of advanced wood heating, like the automated fuel feeding systems, the combustion controls, et cetera. That's new language.
Well, these are features again, okay? These are features, not requirements. So I want to be clear about that, right? That's what you said earlier.
Right. I think in the spirit, I had listened in on the last tag meeting and was trying to get at the intent in a way that I felt was language that would communicate that intent more clearly than the previous language did.
Well, I'll do a comparison of the two for myself. What I'm reading here seems to be consistent with what we had before, about which I was prepared to vote, on which I was prepared to vote. For me, it's not about technology. It's about the standards, meeting whatever standards we think are appropriate. So that's going to be the key matter for me. Thanks.
And yeah, sorry, I can't see much of Teams. I think that was Rick. Was that?
Yeah, that was Rick Weston.
Yeah.
Okay. So Rick, thank you for your comments and I agree. I think the issue is right now we're in a really difficult place with wood heating. I'll use the Alaska Air Director's quote, which is, we assumed the foundation that we had, which was the federal program to identify cleaner units, was in place, and we built our house on a rotten foundation. And so you don't have a good program if it's built on a rotten foundation.
I understand that point, and this language deals with it. I mean, cordwood appliances are not an eligible clean heat measure at this time. That seems to be okay. But what this language does, and I don't mean to be, harp on this, except that I'm agreeing with you that if a technology can meet the standards, I don't want to exclude it. If it can't meet it now, and because of all the concerns that you've articulated, and it has to do with obviously the technology itself and the testing, well, that's fine.
Yeah, and can we move on to kind of the details? Because I think we wanted to lay this in talking to Emily, my sense was like, let's start with this general statement. And then in the previous document, I believe it was the October 17th document, there were some performance standards. And I'd like to get into that because I think that may help illustrate some of the issues.
Yeah, let's go there in a minute, but we do have two other hands
Okay.
raised. We had Jared and then Luce.
Thank you. Hi, Lisa. Good to hear from you. Thanks for sharing all this today. I have one very basic question and maybe a follow-up question. I'm trying to figure out what the difference between option 1 and 2 is. And the only difference I see is the inclusion of pellet stoves in option 2. Are they otherwise the same?
So, I'm not coming, this is somebody who's got the history of the tag. So what I heard is that, right, the difference between option 1 and option 2 is option 2 puts forward a pellet and chip only program. This option leaves the door open for consideration of other technologies in the future if and when verifiable good data becomes available.
But I
I think that was the intent that I heard. Emily, you
yeah, I
may.
think the other difference, there is my understanding of option one is that we were thinking of fully automated systems as only the central heating systems, whereas the definition or the features of advanced wood heating described in this proposed option that Lisa walked through, it does mention automated fuel feeding systems, but that would still include pellet stoves. So there is also, I think, a potential difference in coverage of pellet stoves.
Well, and I think the other difference is option one is only fully automated, and fully automated has a very different terminology than some of the technologies. And actually, I would argue only fully automated. What does that mean? Is it automated fuel feeding? Is it automated emission controls? Only fully automated could mean a lot of things. So I would actually argue that option one, if you were thinking about that, would require clarification to understand what needs to be automated to qualify.
Mhm.
Thank you. This might be a performance question, so you can defer this if appropriate. But I'm curious if there's any consideration here. We've talked a lot about performance standards at the point of use, but is there any consideration of kind of life cycle emissions and health impacts and comparing any of these different technology options? Thinking about like pellet manufacturing, for example.
I think that's in the next session in terms of the carbon impact. Is that correct, Emily?
Well,
Yeah, it is. And I mean, that's
carbon-
also a potential health impact so I think we're going to get to part of that in the second half of this meeting.
Yeah, I mean, there is the this is sort of the parallel to the carbon part of it that I get, I guess for example, one of my questions would be, does manufacture of pellets generate emissions harmful to human health, ignoring the GHG, piece of it?
I mean, Jared, what you're getting into is what makes wood heating really complicated. Because the piece, there's the pellet piece, but there's also the piece of, the actual emissions, the public health impacts on cordwood is significantly higher than pellets. But when you're comparing pellet heating to any other fossil fuel, the emissions are higher, period dot. It's that's 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 rock solid. So you're always increasing emissions if you're drawing the circle around the home, if you're moving from a fossil fuel to wood heating. So the other piece is as you improve that PM emissions performance, you increase CO2 and NOx. So it's really complicated because when you press down on one, you pick up on the other. And it's a very complicated set of evaluation criteria for wood heating, which I think is why many places have stayed away from it, because there's not a clean, simple, easy answer.
Thanks, Lisa.
Luce?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for this information. And at some point, could we hear from Efficiency Vermont on what rebates they're giving now so that we understand, what they're looking at? It does seem like cordwood is very complicated. I mean, when we looked at some of the information, how EPA, even the testing of the cordwood, is it dry wood, is it wet wood? And it's not automated in a lot, if a lot of the places, right? And that one just seems to me like should not be included in advanced wood heat. And I know that's what we're discussing this morning, and that's just my opinion. Pellet stoves, still trying to understand some of the issues with pellet stoves. I know that the EPA has a 2.5 particulate matter.
Ooh, I'm going to correct you. It is 2.0 grams per hour. It's not 2.5. 2.5 was only applied to testing with cordwood, and that test method was revoked. So let's be clear, the emission limit on the federal program is 2.0.
And some of the pellet stoves now that people can get in efficiency from Efficiency Vermont have a 1.2 particulate matter rating. So I'd like just to understand that. It doesn't have to be in this meeting, but understand that a little bit more if we should include or exclude those. Thank you.
So, and I just want to let you know, certainly you should talk to Efficiency Vermont, but I actually had a call with Efficiency Vermont, walk through their program with them, and they gave me their program documents.
Which maybe if you could just go back for 1 second and remind Luce where that was summarized and
Right.
So this is the Vermont program is $400 for cordwood and pellet stove. So this is up here is pellet cordwood chip. So it's $400 for either a cordwood or a pellet stove. They require emissions below 2.0 grams per hour. I should say there are still some stoves, cordwood stoves that are over 2.0 grams per hour. They are going to be coming off. EPA made a policy decision to allow them to remain on the list for the life of their certification, which is 5 years. But all those stoves, we have not seen a single stove yet that can meet the new without using that cordwood test, they can't meet the number. We haven't seen a single unit retest and meet that number. NESCOM actually did some testing. I will tell you that we have a stove that tested at 2.0 grams per hour with that cordwood method. We ran our duty cycle test. It came in at 42 grams an hour. So those stoves are highly problematic that were certified with that test method.
Right, and the operation is so,
Right.
it varies so much that I can see where that would be a real challenge.
And it was, to answer your question, all certification testing is done with fuel between 19 and 25% moisture content.
Okay.
The central heating rebate is $6,000. It is pellet only. It does not include chips and it does not include cordwood. They do require, so they require that it be installed under their efficiency excellence network, and they have a list of contractors. It must be indoor. It must have a ton of fuel storage, and commercial new construction projects are not eligible.
Thank you.
And if you'd like those documents, I can share those documents that I received from Efficiency Vermont. We only have 15 minutes left, and so I think, Emily, it makes sense to go into the performance specs. I'm worried we're not going to have time, but what I did was just trying to give some background and what I heard. So just so everybody knows, the test methods that EPA uses right now are going away. And actually, I'll back up. I would recommend that you delineate between residential and commercial. There are federal requirements for residential installations. And what I saw in the October 17th document could potentially provide credits to illegal installations if they were done in residential applications, which I think the tag needs to be aware of that. So I delineated between residential and commercial for this work. That's a recommendation. You can choose to do what you wish. But what you should know, just background, is that we anticipate new federal test methods to be in place by the end of 2026. And there is a consent decree that will require EPA to promulgate new standards for stoves by December of 2027. So the landscape is changing and it will be changing in the next 3 years. So just be aware that we know that we're going to be getting new requirements. My sense is that there was tag consensus on a pellet only program at this time for stoves. So I pulled some data from EPA's database to give you a sense of what qualifies currently. So 80% of the stoves are 70% efficient or higher, 67 are 75% or higher, and 26% are 80% and higher. Now, these are just looking at these metrics because the numbers change when you start doing a mix and match of different emissions. I will also say we have done testing. We have the reason why many of our agencies who we've worked with go to pellet only programs is because we found that the emission rates and efficiency rates from the certification data, there's only about a 20% difference rather than the order of magnitude differences we're seeing on the cordwood stoves. So pellet stoves, just a reminder, 2.0 is the maximum allowed. 96% of stoves will meet a 1.8 gram per hour limit. 82% will meet a 1.5 gram per hour limit, and 43% will meet a less than 1 gram per hour minute. Now, that number gets smaller if you then tie it to an efficiency value. So these are just for those single metrics, but I was not sure where the tag wanted to go. I can certainly pull numbers if folks want to know what happens if we combine this efficiency with this emission. The other things that are requirements, both in the Efficiency Vermont, but other program that I thought folks should consider is the requirement to use a certified installer. I'm not sure if Efficiency Vermont requires NFI, that's National Fireplace Institute, but typically there's some certification that should be done to be eligible. So making sure it's a certified appliance. And I thought for Vermont, you might want to consider, are you willing to include second homes, or are you only want to include primary residences? I also put a list of the incentives that are currently available. There's a $2,000 federal incentive and a $400 incentive. That's $2,400. I actually have full purchase and installation costs from VEIC that I received several years ago that indicated for pellet stoves, the average cost to purchase and install a new appliance was a little bit over $4,600. So the existing subsidies in Vermont support 52% of the median cost today. So that's just some background. What we are putting forward as a straw proposal for tag consideration is pellet only, efficiency greater than 80%, as certified by the EPA Wood Heater Database, and PM emissions at 1 gram an hour per EPA certification test, require professional installation and only primary residences.
And Lisa, can you just, that's just for the specs for residential, right? Can you just quickly go over the commercial, and then we've got Catherine's had her hand raised for a while.
Okay, now this is stoves. For central heating
So
systems,
there's a lot more.
there's a lot more. Yeah, residential systems. Let me tell you, this is residential central heating gets really complicated because the current program suffers the same issue on the cordwood side, and there will be data coming out either the end of this year or early next year about that issue. There's not as many pellet boilers, and it gets really complicated because 5 are certified with mandatory thermal storage, and it's a very different test than the units that certify without thermal storage. So the ones that certify with thermal storage go through a duty cycle test. The ones that certify without, it's a steady state test. If you just use performance specs without considering how they were tested, you might actually be eliminating some of the cleanest units. And we've tested some of these units with thermal storage. They are great, but they probably won't meet your performance specs. So that's one of the issues, is not tying the specs to how they're tested. You might be missing out on some really good units. I want to point out there are no federally certified chip units. So at this point, certifying or giving credits to a residential chip unit would actually be incentivizing an illegal unit. They may come in the future. So I'll jump through because I want to just get to this, is that so there's only 18 units that are pellet central heaters that are EPA certified at this point. So we've got 70% that meet 89% meet a 70% efficiency, but you'd be tossing out 2 units that certified with thermal storage. At 75% efficiency, you toss out all but one of the thermal storage units. And at 80% efficiency, you get 56% of the units and nothing with thermal storage. In terms of the emission levels, you've got 0.10 pounds per million BTU. That's the minimum. Anything 0.70 and higher basically means everyone's in. The lowest number we have is 0.7 on the EPA list. At 0.50, which is 50% of the standard, you still have 72% in. In the interest of time, there are other pieces here. We did the cost analysis. Current Vermont subsidies support 36% of the median cost. So what we are recommending for proposed performance specifications is pellet only. Units required to use thermal storage per EPA certification qualify, no performance specs needed. Units certified without thermal storage, 0.07. I missed my bullet. Efficiency should be greater than 80%. And certified for indoor installation only, should be professionally installed and effectively meet the Efficiency Vermont requirements. So aligning those requirements. And only eligible for primary residences. Now, when we get to the commercial side, things get really, well, they could, depending upon your viewpoint, less or more complicated. So you could have a unit that's illegal to install for a residential unit, but legal to install in a commercial unit. Because under 1 million BTUs, or actually, I should say, the NSPS only applies to units installed in homes. There are certainly commercial units that could go into smaller buildings that could be used in commercial installations, but don't undergo sizing requirements. That's something that's probably going to be fixed in the NSPS, is they will we're hoping that they will set anything below X size must be certified. But right now we're living in a gray area where we do have this right now, that units that are illegal to use in homes are legal to use in commercial installations. And I'm not sure that I didn't get a sense of where the tag was on this, but so for commercial installations, I don't have a recommendation, but I just wanted to make folks aware that we've got New York State so next door requires that any unit larger than 1 million BTUs meets an emission limit of 0.10 pound per million BTU using EPA method 5. We actually have letters from EPA, and NESCOM has gone on record that EN 303 is not a substitute. Emissions are you cannot use EN 303 to assess PM the way we do here in the US, which is total PM. And in Vermont at DEC, the back limit, so that's best available control, that's typically what's required, and it has been applied to units over 3 million BTUs, is 0.03 pounds per million BTU. And that's an old limit. That's not saying that was done recently. That's been in place for at least 5 years. I don't know the exact date.
Yeah.
But I think in the interest of time, I'll stop. I'm
Mhm.
sorry this has taken so long. It is complicated.
Yeah, no, appreciate everybody's forbearance. I think you can see why it got complicated kind of quickly. We have Catherine and then Adam.
Thanks, Emily. Actually, I was going to ask if Adam could speak first and then I'll jump in.
So Lisa, I want to clarify one detail on the kind of the intersect between the federal mandates on the residential units and then the kind of the Vermont DEC permitting requirements. Several years ago, they did acknowledge that there's this commercial boiler gap between the 350,000 BTU per hour and the 3 million BTU per hour size range. And they do have a process that was enacted in 2016 and then amended in 2022. And I'll drop a link in the chat. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
Correct, but it's still, the point that I was making was if you had a unit that was 500,000 BTUs and installed, say, at a home that had a dairy farm, that's a residential application and must meet the federal requirements. If that was at a unit that was solely commercial, it would not need to meet the same requirements as a residential unit. In the NSPS document, it actually, in the response to comments, EPA indicated that they would be assessing residential units up to 10 million BTUs.
Catherine?
Thanks. Yeah, this is a lot of information to take in, and I appreciate the work that's been put into this. I'm wondering, has the Vermont Air Quality Division had a chance to look at this or provide feedback? I mean, you're speaking to their direct jurisdiction and providing a lot of information about that, and I just want to make sure that they have also had a chance to look at this.
So I spoke to a DEC representative yesterday. They are very concerned about any use of wood heating. Their comfort level is more with the pellet program. I think the folks who are working on the ambient air quality standards are very concerned about what happens with the next round of NAAQS revisions, which will likely be the daily. Quite frankly, if this gets technical fast, but if EPA decided to move from a midnight to midnight determination of PM versus a 24 rolling average, right now thermal inversions occur at night, and the way they calculate the NAAQS, it splits those inversions in half. If they make that single change, the picture for PM non-attainment for Vermont would become cloudy. I don't know the most recent data, but I know in the past when we looked at this, we would have several areas of the Northeast that would come into non-attainment, and wood heating would be a very significant impact just with that single change.
Yeah, and just to kind of to sort of for like a non-technical expert, the other thing that comes up with wood heat is a lot of these in the wood world, there's all this history of change out programs. So you're going from like a bad, a highly polluting wood heater to like a somewhat less polluting wood heater. That's not what we're talking about with the clean heat standard. We're talking about transitioning from another type of fuel, probably in most cases, to wood. So, and wood has higher, pretty much any type of wood fuel has higher particulate emissions than fossil fuel. So, we're just trying to avoid an outcome where the Vermont Clean Heat Standard ends up creating a lot of new air emissions that makes it harder for Vermont to stay in attainment.
And that
But-
is so
I'm sorry,
Catherine, to your point, we have not gotten approval, like these very detailed specifics. I wanted to get a sense of where folks were, and certainly if you wanted me to check in with the DEC team on this, I'm happy to do that. I actually do have a debriefing call scheduled with them tomorrow morning, so I could certainly do that. We scheduled that purposely to get a sense of where the tag was. So I appreciate that comment, and let me know how you would like me to follow up on that.
Yeah, I think it's really critical that air quality get eyes on this, particularly because this is a very detailed document that at least I was unable to access ahead of time for this meeting. So I was unable to speak with our air quality people about that. So I think that is really critical before moving forward. I also just want to add that when we talk about emissions, I think it's really important to make sure that we are defining our scale of what we're talking about. Are you talking about it at the individual home level? Are you talking about it at the statewide level? What are you describing? Because it's, as you've said many times, this gets really complicated really fast. And so I think really we have to be very clear with terminology.
So thank you for that. That's one of the reasons why I didn't want to circulate it, because this is the first time you guys are seeing this. I will gladly go through. These are all based on individual installations. So the ambient piece is much harder, and there's a lot involved in figuring that out. So I don't think that would be a very difficult, and I would say near impossible step to take. So I will make that clarification. And I would like to circulate that with both my executive director, who hasn't seen this, and DEC, and I can get their comments on this before we circulate it as an official NESCOM proposal. This is still draft, but we wanted to have your input before something got circulated.
so this is a lot of detail. Lisa, can you scroll up to the kind of proposed option? So I'm mindful of the fact that we like sort of took as a starting point something that was more of a tag document, and this is really a NESCOM straw proposal. So I know, and let's take like 10 more minutes on this issue, before we shift gears to the other topic. But I just wanted to get a pulse of where we are on this proposed option. I guess 2 questions for tag members. One is the detailed, it wasn't necessarily clear to me that we had to define all those super detailed eligibility criteria that Lisa just walked through in advance. But NESCOM's perspective, I think, as I understand it from Lisa, is that because the devil's in the details and there's a lot of room for things to slip through, it actually is important to define all the specific eligibility criteria in advance. So that's kind of one issue we can discuss, like how detailed do we need to go? And then big picture, I would love to get a pulse on how tag members are feeling and if anyone wants to put forward an alternative option for the tag to consider at our meeting next week, which would also need to be written up somehow. So be thinking about those questions, but I think I'll pause here and take public comment too, because before we move on from this issue, we want to hear from members of the public. I would ask members of the public to keep it very brief and limit your comments on the definition of advanced wood heating, because we'll be discussing all the carbon intensity and life cycle accounting issues in the next topic, and we'll take public comment then as well. So please keep this to the equipment eligibility stuff. Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands going up from the public. Going once, twice. Okay. Great. Well, maybe this discussion has covered it then. Yeah, so then we'll return to my prior question for tag members. Do folks feel like with, this proposed option sort of as written or with very minor tweaks, potentially, if you have anything, that this could be what we put forth and see if the tag agrees with? Or do you feel like is there anyone that would like to propose an alternative approach to the definition of advanced wood heat for the tag to consider at the meeting next week?
This is Rick. Members can propose what they want, at the next meeting or beforehand. I need to read this through and think about it in detail. There's a lot of detail here that that deserves consideration. So I need the time.
So Emily, in terms of that, and I appreciate Rick's comment, this is something that does require some time and consideration. What I'd like to do is, if there's any clear issues that folks have, let me know. I will modify. I need to send this before I send it out. I need to put it through the NESCOM process to put it out publicly. And I will confer with DEC and see if we can get something out by the end of the day tomorrow, if that works for folks.
Oh, that's great, Lisa. The sooner the better. This has been dragged out, to use that expression, longer than we'd expected. So obviously the sooner the better. I'd be very grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to, acknowledge it's election day and Lisa's super busy and everything else that's going on. It's a lot. But I would like to get to the point where we could have a version to circulate to the full tag by Monday at the very latest, which means that we'd need to collect input from everyone in the subgroup, this week.
Emily, you can circulate anything you want to the full tag. You don't
Yeah.
need sign off on the subgroup. And I to the extent you can do it, Friday would be better than Monday. But
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I would offer that for anyone else. Like if anyone else wants to propose another option for the tag to consider, we've had a lot of last minute circulation. I've been responsible for some of them on the advanced wood heating stuff. So I'm trying to do it by Friday or Monday morning at the very latest so that the tag members actually have a chance to review things in advance. So yeah, so Lisa and the team will work on that on our end and we'll circulate this around to folks as soon as we possibly can this week. And does anyone,
Can I ask one last question?
yeah,
If there's any folks on this call who have data requests or things that they would like to have, I might have access to that. So please feel free to email me and I can try and include it in the write-up. So if, for instance, do you want the Efficiency Vermont documentation I received? Those are the kinds of things that I can add if that helps the process.
does anyone have any other proposals or questions or suggested, process suggestions, Luce?
Hi, this is more, it seems like cordwood seems pretty challenging, right? That's what we're hearing from everybody. I'm still not sure about pellet stoves, and I'm also not sure, and maybe Emily, your group can help with this. On commercial applications, if I'm thinking of larger boilers that are running on propane or number 2 fuel, are you better going to a pellet boiler or not? Because electric boilers are still have a ways to go. They're very pricey and they also use a lot of electricity. So, and I just know here at the university, we just looked at replacing one of our large boilers and it would use 12 megawatts of electricity for a cost of 1.3 million at our central plant. So we're still trying to evaluate options. And I guess I'd like more info on what can commercial properties do, realistically to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. If you've seen that in other states or what people are doing, and is it smart to go to a pellet boilers or not for our school districts, right? Our large high schools that are using large oil boilers. I guess if you have any information on that, I would appreciate it. I think the residential one's fairly clear, but I think the commercial one's a little fuzzier when you get to larger systems.
So on that, can I ask you to define what you mean by better? Are you looking at GHG emissions? Are you looking at all
Right.
air emissions? Are you looking at efficiency?
Right. Right. And also there's the long-term impact, right? So,
Yep.
and it's possible that do we allow something for 5 years and then, or 3 years, and then we reevaluate, but these systems typically go in for 10 to 20 years. So, trying to understand the impact, I'm trying to understand, I look at resiliency. So, the grid isn't there yet to handle some of these large power loads. It's getting there, but it's not there yet. So I'm just trying to get in my mind, I don't want to put us in such a box that we're not able to improve the situation, either improve efficiencies and head more towards less greenhouse gas impact, but maybe not perfect. I guess that.
Yeah, I think
It's like, where's the balancing act, especially?
Yeah, I think I think that's a great question, Luce, and we'll try to compile some thoughts for you. There are a few coming through in the chat that obviously not vetted. In the interest of time, I think we should move on to the other topic, but yeah, and I suspect Adam also has some ideas on that as well. So would invite, tag members to share information with one another.
Yeah, I'm not looking for an answer today. It's just questions in my mind, where
Yeah,
do we
for
go with
sure.
the larger users? Thank you.
I can pull some stack testing information together as well. We've got that. I don't think we can address the upstream, and that's going to be my segue to Emily and the carbon intensity. But
Yeah,
we can certainly work on that.
Yeah, so we will continue working to refine this Well, Lisa and the team will continue to work on refining this and running it through ANR's air division and so forth this week so that we can circulate it to the tag by Friday. And, if anyone else wants to circulate, now that you've seen the direction we're going to propose, if anyone wants to share any alternative proposals for the tag, I would encourage you to do it on the same timeline, just so the tag has a fair opportunity to kind of see everything holistically. And with that, we'll move on to the next topic, and I'm going to share my screen again because I did not come from life cycle accounting land. So it's been kind of confusing for me to even understand what we're talking about on this issue. I recognize that ANR has done a lot of work as well, and we'll invite them to weigh in, but I thought it would be good to just sort of remind everyone like what we're talking about and make sure I even understand this correctly. So the scope of this part of the conversation has to do with carbon intensity of wood fuels, aka emissions rates, aka life cycle greenhouse gas accounting. We are talking about 3 different fuel types. Opinion Dynamics had originally had 4. They had this non-commercial firewood category, but they have since shared with us that that was a mistake and that will be removed so that it's just firewood, pellets, and chips. And then when you're calculating life cycle greenhouse gas emissions and life cycle emission rates, my understanding is that there are 3 components of that calculation for wood, at least in how Opinion Dynamics has done it. There's the combustion emissions, and I've listed here, this is the method that Opinion Dynamics used in their first draft TRM that they've shared with the tag and the PUC. It's not intended to, this is not a recommendation, just to be clear. This is just me documenting what Opinion Dynamics said they did in that draft document. So not a proposal, just an accounting of what's been done so far. So there's combustion emissions, that those are the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted when you actually burn the wood. And that is carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And Opinion Dynamics used combustion emission rates from the US EPA emission factors hub. And then there's upstream emissions, which are like from the processing of the, say the wood into the pellets or the waste material into the pellets, whatever it may be. The transport, I assume, of some of that. The upstream emissions, they used GREET, and they calculated those using a similar framework as in the Vermont Energy Sector Life Cycle Analysis Report. And then there's this GWP Bio. I know this is of high interest to a lot of our public commenters. They use the World Wildlife Fund biogenic carbon calculator, and I've included their assumptions for, forest types and things like that. And some of the explanation for, this is the one that's been really confusing to me. But this is applied to account for that temporal difference where forests take a long time to regrow. Opinion Dynamics, in a response to ANR questions, said they've only applied this to wood fuels as opposed to, for example, crop-based biofuels like soy, biodiesel, or renewable diesel, or corn-based renewable diesel, something like that, because the growth cycle is magnitudes longer than the growth cycle used in other types of biofuels. I think there could be a lot of discussion, my understanding within life cycle accounting practice, about how to apply GWP Bio or if that's the best way to do it, but that's what they've done thus far. And then I put this little calculation here. This is my understanding, and I could be wrong. So I just wanted to pause here and say, like, is this other people's understanding as well? What I think they're doing is adding the upstream and combustion emissions together, and then multiplying that by the GWP Bio, and that gives you the life cycle emissions rates. So I'll pause here, but I just thought it might be helpful to kind of like quickly recap what Opinion Dynamics has done so far and the different components of the carbon intensity, kind of the pieces that go into that calculation for wood fuels. So let me pause there and see, does anyone have any corrections to offer or questions, Ken?
Yeah, I don't know if GWP Bio is multiplied by the upstream emissions part. I thought it was just the combustion emissions part, but I could be wrong. But I thought upstream emissions was calculated independently because upstream emissions may not be specifically related to the combustion of wood.
That's correct.
Okay. I will edit this this file so it's so you can remove that parentheses
And
And
you
then I
wouldn't,
think it would be correct.
and you wouldn't apply GWP bio to the CH4 and N2O component either. It's just the
Just
biogen
the
portion.
CO2 component. Okay, that's a great clarification as well. Yeah, see, this is for those of us that are not absolutely steeped in this, it's been even hard to follow how this is being treated. Okay, so just to recap, the calculation would be combustion emissions is times GWP bio for just the carbon emission component plus upstream emissions equals the life cycle emission rate. At least that's what we think they're doing. At least that's what they did in the first draft. So I think the question to the tag that I would frame for the tag is, do we agree with these methods? And if not, where would we propose alternatives, both to the methods and to the specific assumptions and sources they used? I know we've gotten a lot of public comment about different aspects of this, but I thought it might be helpful to kind of walk through these components one at a time, and just kind of see, just so we don't kind of conflate all these issues together. So I was wondering if, like, would that make sense? Could we kind of talk through, is there any question or recommendation we have on upstream, any recommendation and question we have on combustion emissions? And then we'll move into the GWP bio. Ken?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I think it's pretty clear that at least for the first iterations of implementation of clean heat standard, we're not going to include cordwood combustion. And to simplify the discussion, if we remove cordwood from these calculations, because that's one of the things that I don't know the exact mechanism they used, but the fact that they had carbon emissions or our greenhouse gas emission carbon intensity value for cordwood, if my memory is significantly higher than other wood products. Just I didn't understand that, but I don't need to understand that if we're never going to use it. So that's something that we might want to consider, is let us not consider the carbon intensity value of cordwood at this point, because it's not going to influence in the early iterations the determination of credit values for any of the installed
And
measures.
are you talking, when you say carbon intensity, are you talking about these life cycle emission rate? Because
Yeah. I mean that's the life. Okay, with that table, that's one portion, and then you go to the right, and it has the combustion portion, and then and I don't know if in this table, yeah, there's the combustion portion, and then if you go further to the right, it's the sum. So there's life cycle upstream emission. Anyway, I remember there's a total somewhere.
yeah, I think the first part is the total.
Oh, okay.
So, and this one is, we can remove because we're not including that one, but I don't.
Oh, I was reading it
way.
wrong. It's the pellets were so significant.
Yeah, so pellets are
And-
the one where the life cycle emissions, I mean, sorry, the upstream emissions, because of the
Yeah,
processing and transport, I assume
very large.
pellets are much, much higher. So I don't know that your suggestion solves our problem.
Okay, and yeah, because when we get to it, I don't believe opinion dynamics use these numbers, because the most creditable action, I looked at their table, is a pellet stove. Life cycle, lifetime credits available for the installation of a pellet stove, not a whole home pellet system, by the way, but a pellet stove, is larger than any other technology, which I found.
Is that from opinion dynamics or from the potential
I think
study?
it's from opinion dynamics. It's the character. It's the, I don't know what we call it. The big workbook to characterize the
Yeah.
clean heat measures.
All right. It seems like we have some other, and I've just tried to make these corrections on the fly. See, this is why I asked the question, because even I barely understand how this is supposed to be done. Hang on, just trying to move over to the participants. Did we have, okay, so Ken, you had your hand raised. Catherine?
Yeah, Emily, I was just curious. Opinion Dynamics has revised or proposed revisions to this information, haven't they? It seems like you're presenting what was initially proposed in like late summer that has since changed.
I don't believe they've actually sent us a revised TRM or workbook is one issue. Yes, I tried to open everything. So for when I thought the change was clear cut, they said they made a mistake on the non-commercial and they were going to remove that. So I'm assuming nobody has any objection to that. Everything else, I think they're just they're still awaiting further direction from the tag, is my understanding. I don't think we've provided clear enough direction for them to have been able to incorporate revisions into their process. Does anybody disagree with that assessment?
They did a memo on October 9th, and they specifically said they were proposing revisions in the assumptions they used to estimate the life cycle emissions for wood fuels.
Yeah, I can try to find that one as well. But I don't know if they've done that yet. And I guess what I'm saying is, even if they were going down a certain path, I don't think we're locked into that because we've never had this discussion at the tag.
Sorry, I'm going to add, it seems like you should be providing that in order to have this discussion rather than only looking at their initial proposal. If they've offered another proposal, you should be evaluating both.
I'm just trying to find that because I thought I saved everything. I'll stop sharing and see if I can track that down. Rick, do you remember what she's talking about?
I do, but I don't, off the top of my head, I don't. It would take me a little time to find it as well. I'm sorry. Yes, Lisa?
I just wanted to offer, I know California did a GHG analysis on wood fuels, and I could pass that along if that's helpful. And then the only question I had on the fuel side, and I don't know if this is on topic, is there going to be any requirement to ensure the fuel was harvested sustainably, or the fuel used any type of certification? I know in our previous work that was really critical to ensuring the benefits that are being put forward.
That so far has not been part of the discussion. One could imagine that it would be. Then we get into all kinds of discussions about what constitutes sustainability. But
I'm just suggesting, the utilization of some current existing certification programs, or I believe Maine does this. But there are a bunch of existing certification programs out there that could be, reviewed and see if they're appropriate for use for this program.
But this raises a problem that I've raised before. We're looking at the fuels, and I believe, and we probably need to make this the final determination, credits are going to be assigned to the installation of the appliance. And once that appliance is installed, I don't know how we then require the user to use a particular fuel. And again, maybe there may be the other opinion that no, we'll determine credits based on the fuel sold. That's going to be a very different management beast.
Ken, I think you're right on that point.
Let's circle back to that because Catherine, I found the memo, I think, that you were referencing, and I apologize that I missed this. There have been so much back and forth that it's hard to keep track. But so just to quickly walk through Opinion Dynamo's response to the initial comment. So they removed non-commercial firewood. They're changing the upstream emissions assumptions to assume that they are derived from waste, or they're proposing to do this. Again, none of this is final. They proposed a different GWP bio that would be more reflective of Vermont forests. And Ken, this might be what you're thinking about too. So they proposed these set of revisions where they set upstream emissions for pellets and chips to 0 for those fuels. And they, let's see, treat commercial firewood as a non-waste product. And I think that's what makes, so I think, Ken, what you were recalling is with that change, commercial firewood then suddenly ends up looking a lot worse. That's pretty different than the starting carbon intensities that I just shared, which maybe is a moot point if we end up not including firewood. And Catherine, it looks like you have your hand up, but I think this is what you were referring to.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, my understanding of this memo is that they are not changing the upstream emissions. They were describing their initial assumptions, and they were then aligning their calculations to be consistent with those initial assumptions, because there was a disconnect that had occurred initially. So they were aligning their work to be consistent. So, and I will just add, I think there had been a question about why that cordwood number had gotten so high. And the reason is because they are making the assumption that the trees being harvested for cordwood are purpose grown and purpose harvested. So they're making a very large assumption there.
But why would that lead to such a higher, the difference seems to be in the combustion carbon intensity and not the upstream.
Yeah, it's because they are assuming that the entire tree being harvested it was purposely put there and is purposely being harvested only for firewood, and that no other use would occur when you have that timber available to you. And so all of it's all being put onto the cordwood.
So that's
mathematically the GWP bio number goes way up.
Right.
Okay, so what's happening there is the GWP bio, they're applying a GWP bio of 0 to the pellets and chips because they're assuming it's all waste, and
it's a byproduct or residue, right?
Yeah.
And they're not doing that with firewood. They're treating it as purpose harvest, like it is only for that, no other use occurs. And so it's essentially as if a saw log is being used for firewood.
Lisa, let's take a comment, and then I want to go through these components kind of one at a time just to make sure we address each of them. Lisa, go ahead.
Sorry, it took a minute to unmute. I would, as somebody who's worked in the pellet, done a lot of research in the pellet manufacturing, that's a pretty big assumption to assume that 100% is waste. I know that, for instance, New England Wood Pellets gets feedstock from many different sources, and they need some sort of stability to ensure a product that meets their requirements. Which is why I was asking about the sustainability criteria, because that's a pretty big assumption on the pellet side, as well as the chip side. For instance, in Vermont air permitting, they do permit the fuel, and they have different emission limits depending upon whether or not they use a bowl chip or a mill end chip. And those chips may have different feedstock sources.
Okay,
Thanks.
If we could, Catherine, before we continue this conversation, I wanted to let's just take these components one at a time, starting with the combustion emissions. So before the application of GWP bio, just the straight combustion emissions. Does anyone think that this method highlighted here should be different, including the combustion emission rates for CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide from the EPA emissions factor hub. I wanted to just touch on this one because I know NESCOM has commented on that and has done some research, but yeah. So does anyone think that our sense is that this might be workable, but if anyone disagrees on just the combustion emissions, again, before the application of GWP bio. Lisa, did you mean to keep having your hand up?
Nope, sorry about that.
Adam?
Yeah, so I'm looking at that second bullet under the OD assumption sources. And the combustion, according to their methodology, should only be CH4 and N2O because they're discounting the biogenic CO2 that's emitted. So the only non-biogenic emission from combustion that's in the calculation per EPA method is the CH4 and the N2O.
Yeah, because that
And
gets
that's
to the
why
application.
GWP bio is applied to the CO2, the biogenic CO2. So you would delete CO2 from that in that line. That's what they're currently doing, not
Well, right, but let's talk about what it would be before the application of the GWP bio. So,
correct. But if you had CO2 as a combustion of the total biogenic or the biogenic CO2 emitted in combustion, then there's no need for GWP bio. Like full stop. That would be double counting. You'd have something like a very, very large emission rate if you counted for it at combustion and then applied GWP bio. GWP bio is only a means to address the fact that the biogenic emissions are not otherwise being accounted for.
so that what you're describing implies a different equation than what I have up here.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is like in that second bullet under it says combustion emissions, you would only be listing you in that step, you would only be accounting for the CH4 and N2O.
Oh, I don't know why my screen just went dark. Does anyone else understand Adam's comment and want to restate it in a way that I can understand? I'm sorry, I just am not following.
Well, I was gonna maybe I don't know if I'm explaining it, but Adam, I think what you're talking about is over the 100-year time horizon, the impacts of the CO2 emissions from wood heating is assuming zero because it's assuming that it's part of the carbon cycle. It was that tree that was harvested, a tree has been replacing it, and over that 100-year time horizon, that CO2 emissions is zero. Is that what you're getting at? Trying to put it in plain English? Really plain English?
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but the CO2 from combustion, that would be the gross, not the net. I guess that's another way to put it.
Right. And that's the place where I had my hand raised, time horizon becomes important because the role of wood really changes when you look at a 100-year time horizon versus a 20 or 30-year horizon that California and New York are looking at. And so that's the benefits, the GHG benefits of wood are really predicated on that 100-year analysis.
Does this revision address your comment, Adam? Like, I understand they're proposing to zero out assume a GWP bio of 0, but were it not, like if they assumed a GWP bio of 0.5, then you would multiply it by the CO2 combustion emissions, wouldn't you?
Yeah, so I mean, if you had a GWP bio of 1, factor of 1, then that would be the same as accounting for all the gross CO2 combustion emissions as measured at the stack or point of combustion. So it's either or, not both. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So again, that doesn't get to the core combustion emissions assumptions. I just want to clarify because NESCOM had at one point proposed using NORA's paper, which has updated emissions factors, but we've looked at this again, and that really is that should really be used as the source, a really good source for criteria air pollutant emission factors, and we are okay with, comfortable with using the EPA emission factor hub for the combustion emission rates, like Opinion Dynamics seems to have done. So I think I'm going to keep going and assume we're okay with that piece. And then there's the, well, let's just go to GWP Bio before we move on to upstream emissions. So that, I know this is kind of the big kahuna in terms of like impact. And again, you can see in that document that Catherine flagged the impact of those GWP Bio assumptions. That they're looking at firewood as a non-waste product and pellets and chips as a waste product. I might not be using the right terms, and I apologize if I'm not. So I know we've gotten a lot of comments about GWP Bio and whether the initial assumption was appropriate for Vermont's forest stock. Their Opinion Dynamics had proposed to shift the forest mix from, I think they had a beech and pine initially, and they were proposing to move that up to 0.75, but because then they also incorporated a assumption of 2 of these fuel types being entirely waste products, that brought the GWP Bio to 0. So I'll pause there. What feedback do folks have on the GWP Bio? Is this a point at which Catherine, you or someone else from ANR would like to weigh in and share kind of your perspective on this from your from the memo that ANR shared, which
Are
I also
you
have and can pull up.
are you speaking about the GWP Bio just generally or specific to pellets and chips? What are you?
Any of it,
Question.
just whatever. I would invite you to share whatever you would like to share relative to this memo.
Sure. So we agree with the revised feedstock assumptions that Opinion Dynamics has proposed with regards to chips and pellets that aligns with our understanding and the realities of Vermont forests and how we manage them and how we use our wood. We do have concerns with some of the changes that they have made in their assumptions with firewood. We don't believe that aligns with how firewood is produced. And we did outline that in the memo. Happy to talk about that further, but I think we tried to be fairly clear about it.
So the 0.75 GWP Bio for firewood, you think may not be maybe too high because a lot of firewood is produced as byproduct and might not be quite the right species mix? Is that the comment?
Yeah, so the assumptions that they've made with regards to how they are selecting inputs into the biogenic carbon footprint calculator, we do not believe that they align with Vermont's forests or how we have wood utilization in the Northeast. And for the purposes of the clean heat standard, it seemed very important to the legislature that all of the calculations and methods be aligned with Vermont's use in our forests. And that is just a challenging spot here where this does not align with our forests and how we use them.
What I'm not seeing in your write-up is an alternative proposal for GWP Bio that could be applied to firewood.
Yeah, So the reason that we don't have that is because our understanding of Act 18 was that the contractor was hired to produce the life cycle analysis emissions and the fuel measure characterizations, and the tag is responsible for reviewing and providing feedback. And so we are here to support the tag in providing that feedback and in understanding and providing context around Vermont's forests, forest management, and wood utilization.
Okay, thank you. Lisa? I assume it's just taking you a minute to unmute.
Ugh, I keep talking without unmuting. Sorry about that. I understand the assumption that chips are a Vermont product. They typically don't travel more than 100 miles, which is my understanding, right or wrong. But pellets are a different story. We've bought pellets in Vermont that have come from British Columbia. And so I think there needs to be recognition that chips may be a local fuel, but pellets are not necessarily a local fuel.
Catherine, could you share a little bit more about ANR's perspective, like why you believe that to be? I don't know whether it's you're saying it's a local fuel versus a waste byproduct.
Well, that seems like different things, right? Like local, are we asking about local, or are we talking about the feedstock? Like how forests are managed and what a forest harvest looks like and the products that can be produced? Or are we talking about where that occurs?
What I'm talking about is I would concur that chips are a local Vermont product, and it's appropriate to be using Vermont forestry conditions for the chips. Pellets, especially bagged pellets. I mean, bulk pellets may be a different story, but bagged pellets travel very far. And we know what we've bought in the Vermont market because we've done analysis of wood pellet fuels. So I know what I've bought in Vermont, and they are, the vast majority are actually, at least for the bag pellets, and so this goes to including pellet stoves, which are going to be using bagged pellets, not bulk pellets. That assumption, I guess I'm questioning the assumption that it's a Vermont product when we're talking about bagged pellets.
Well, so I think that goes to two different components of the assumption.
Yeah.
I assume that the transportation, like if you're bringing in pellets from British Columbia, that would go into the upstream emissions because of the transport and everything. So we can pause on that and see what people think, if there are changes needed there. And then whether it's a waste product or not goes to the application of the GWP bio. Lisa, do you have any comments on whether it's fair to assume that it's pretty much all byproduct for the pellets?
It is mill specific. So there are mills that use virgin wood as part of their feedstock. As I said earlier, they need to have a consistent product. That does not mean they can solely use waste products. There are other mills that are actually attached to sawmills that are absolutely using a byproduct. But to make a blanket statement that they're all using waste product, because you're getting pellets from outside of Vermont, that's the issue I'm raising. Is it appears that there's assumption that pellets are only coming from Vermont feedstock, and I'm not sure that's an accurate assumption.
Catherine, do you have a response to that?
There's a lot of it in that. So yes, I think that we are conflating a number of different issues here. And I want to make sure that we're very clear about what it is we're discussing. So as far as the terminology that Lisa, you used about virgin wood, I want to be clear that you are using that term to refer to round wood, that does not prevent it from still being a byproduct or a residue. And so this is why we've included definitions for terminology, because this becomes very confusing very quickly when we're not very clear with our terms. So I just want to make that very clear that it's important that we are using the right terms and that we all have shared understanding of them. But to get to the question about local versus not with regards to pellets, we responded to opinion dynamics analysis that looked at feedstock specific to Vermont. That is why we have provided this feedback. If the tag wants to consider pellets that are not coming from Vermont, then it is critical that any inputs being used for the biogenic carbon footprint calculator represent the forest where those pellets are coming from. It would be inappropriate to apply Vermont-specific data points if you're saying that pellets are not coming from Vermont.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Catherine. That's the point I was getting at, and I think that ties back to Ken's point earlier of if you're giving those credits up front and you're assuming the fuel, how are you ensuring that that's happening? And I think that becomes a big issue for the pellet stoves or anything that's relying on a bagged pellet. I don't think we have this issue for bulk pellets.
So I'm going to go to Ken, and then after Ken, I'd like to take some brief public comments. We do have a hard stop at 1 because Catherine needs to leave and that will end our meeting. So we're going to need to try to move towards wrapping up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a solution to this pellet discussion, just an observation. A very, very, very large proportion of pellets burned in Vermont are not Vermont sourced. Probably less than 5%, maybe 10%.
So that seems like a really, I haven't gone back to just check the measure characterization, but that seems important that perhaps the measure characterization could differentiate between Vermont sourced pellets and the other sourced pellets. But I don't think it's reasonable to ask opinion dynamics to look at I'm not sure we know where every single one of those source forests are enough to be able to apply GWP bio accurately for pellets that may be coming from multiple locations that are not Vermont.
Well, even more problematic, we don't the pellet production process and it's dynamic, and what is true today may not be true in 5 years.
Yeah, and that's another, I think, broad concern is making sure that we're articulating, or opinion dynamics is defining the measures clearly enough that we're not, potentially creating incentives for like a flood of cheap pellets from other parts of the country that are treated very favorably or something like that. So at least that's a consideration that I have. I'll pause there and open it up to public commenters to make brief comments. We're only going to be able to take, a couple minutes for this because we've got to start thinking of next steps. But please put your hand up if you'd like to jump in. Pike?
Yeah, thanks for taking up this topic. I've provided through the EPUC and to tag members directly document after document that demonstrates that wood chips and roundwood are not waste. They are products. They are co-products to the harvest operations of more valuable logs. Over time, the documents commissioned by the state have demonstrated that they are products. There's a value to them. There's a value according to the FPR website, and I put that in the chat. There are 3 choices that are happening between when a tree is in the woods and when it gets burned. There's a choice to cut it down. There's a choice to remove it from the forests, and then there is a choice to burn it. In each of those scenarios, each of those choices, there is an alternative or counterfactual that should be considered. When all those 3 choices are considered, it is clear that we don't have a waste product. We're not talking about cow manure. We are talking about purposely cutting a tree, removing it from the forest, and burning it. I provided a document on flood resilience commissioned by the state legislature that indicated that the best use of any slash or residues is leaving it in the forest. So the idea that this is all waste and should be treated as carbon neutral doesn't fly in the face of science and doesn't fly in the face of all the documents that I've presented that have been issued by the state of Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you. I wanted to echo what Pike just said. You know, I've extensively tracked what Burlington Electric does to get its pellets, and it uses a process called whole tree chipping. Trees are cut, brought to a central landing. The higher value ones go to timber mills. Other ones that might be too crooked for that or for pulp use are chipped whole and end up being transported to McNeil. So chips are chipped from whole trees or round wood. According to the latest scientific papers, there was a meta-analysis of many studies. It shows a carbon payback period of 102 years for roundwood. So this whole idea that we should apply a 0% GWP biofactor because it's quote unquote waste is absolutely outrageous. It might be waste in the sense that it's not suitable to be turned into timber, but it's not waste. And if you burn it, it has a huge impact on carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ike, did you have another extremely brief comment?
I do have another extremely brief comment, and that is even waste wood, if we decide to call such wood waste wood, even waste wood is primarily made out of carbon and produces carbon dioxide when it's burned. So the idea that because waste wood is waste wood, that somehow it is becomes fairy dust is ridiculous. We should be using the EPA emissions factors for wood. That's simple. Thank you.
Thank you. So in our remaining 6 minutes, oh, Ashley, we see we have one more public commenter for a very brief comment.
Yeah, just briefly, it's disturbing to me that we don't have, I have not seen on the tag any climate science perspective. I'm wondering why we don't have a climate scientist in this group. It's really disheartening that the science is something that is shared and presented in terms of climate scientists and ecology and biodiversity. It's something that it's sort of left up to us as members of the public to share the science around these really, really critical issues with the tag. And it's not your fault. And this is a breakout session. I realize it's just, I've been following this to the extent that I've been able to here and there. And this is something that really stands out to me. And it's just incredibly disheartening as a member of the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, and we've had some links shared in the chat, which will be collected and incorporated into our notes. So thank you for those. So just in terms of next steps, in terms of where we are on this issue, it sounds like we're comfortable with the source for the combustion emissions. We didn't even talk about the upstream emissions, but the assumption of those of the waste or byproduct, I'm sorry for using the wrong terms, assumptions feed into the upstream emissions and results in a lot of those being disappeared as well. So I think the open issues relate to the assumptions around forest types in GWP bio, and then more importantly, is it waste or not? And I think that we may be at a point of having multiple perspectives on the tag on that. wonder if there's anyone on the tag who feels inclined to write some of this up in terms of a set of options that the tag could review and discuss more clearly at the meeting next week, with the kind of it's not waste perspective being represented and the it is waste perspective being represented. Does anybody have any time they can devote to helping with this? And it's not like there's anything else going on in the world this week. We all have plenty of time.
I'm willing to help. I just feel like I'm still learning so much here, on
Yeah,
this
no,
information,
I hear you.
That's my concern.
Luce, maybe you and I can take a crack at writing this up in like super simple terms, without, I know people have provided a lot of detail, but we're having trouble even following the major components of the calculations and logic. So, so if maybe you and I could work on trying to write this up a little bit so that we can at least facilitate a useful discussion next week. I think the perspectives shared, at least for me, have been really helpful in understanding the range of the range of perspectives, so that I can understand this issue, and Catherine for reminding us of the revisions that Opinion Dynamics is proposing. Unfortunately, we are in kind of a tight schedule to resolve all of this because at this point, this is sort of holding up Opinion Dynamics releasing a second draft of the TRM, as I understand it. It looks like we may have one final public comment. We only have 10 seconds for this, but I'll let you have the floor for the last moment.
Right, and I think too, maybe we need to break it up, Emily. We can talk about it, like some clear decisions, and we're still looking at what are the right numbers, for instance, for the actual performance standards. I mean, I just would want to make sure we would get those right before we submit them.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Jean
yes.
Krause, could you, if you have a super brief comment?
Yes, I do, and that is that the waste or byproducts, whatever we're calling them, have value to the forest itself if they are left on the forest floor. So value, economic value, is not the only value that they accrue. Would like that.
Thank you for that comment. I think we, at least Luce and I and other tag members, have a better understanding of the issues and options here. So we will try to get something for the tag to discuss further that moves the ball forward. And we do need to close here at this point. So thank you all very much. And thanks, Catherine, for facilitating this, making this call possible.